Chapter 3, Genesis. We don't really know who we are or how we got here. Since the beginning of man, man has been an expression of someone who was determined to authenticate, culturally, racially, his relationship with the universe. That's what you are. That's what this is. Let's do Bible. Let's say that this then is a testimony of man in his determination to establish his relationship with what he thinks he is, or with the universe. Is that what this is? I'm asking you. Is that what this is? What do you mean you don't know? You know it's a story about man. It's a testimony. I don't care what you think it is. You call it Bible. What is a Bible but the reference point from which you direct the attentions of the associations of yourself? You're looking for something difficult in this. The fact of the matter is that you have come here and have established a reference, a Bible, in order to attempt to determine a purpose for what you are doing here. You call that a religion. What do you care about what you call it? You are the only thing I know of that does that, because obviously you are the only thing that I know of that apparently is contained within his own relationship of cause and effect as a human being. In that particular way, since the beginning of time, which is nothing but an historic reference of association of the memory of man, you have told stories about yourself. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. What an astonishing idea. You remember this, that idea is not in the mind of God, it is in the mind of man. It is man that is saying God created heaven and earth. Obviously, if God created heaven and earth, if there is a universal mind, he would have no problem. He probably wouldn't even have to say it. Why would he have to say, I am the creator of heaven? Who would there be to know, not to know that? Obviously, we have a situation, whatever we may call in the so-called evolutionary process of associations of time, with a necessity to establish a purpose for our reality and to share that purpose in the limitation invoked in the practice of our own historic references of ourselves. I'm not interested in whether you call this the Christian Bible or any historic reference. What do I care? Whenever you go back into references of associations, actually you have a story about yourself and about the beginning of the world, and about the first man and the first woman. I find it fascinating, and you use it as a Bible or a reference of the associations of man in a determination to find your own purpose. What's wrong with that? I think it's lovely. That's what this book is. Two things we're facing if you really would take care to take a look at it. First of all, man is obviously invented in his own mind association through whatever fundamental needs were inherent in himself as a conceptual association of cause and effect, with the necessity for a creator with more power than he had in association with himself. This is a very strange development. What he actually says is, there is a power in the universe that authenticates my relationship with myself. He doesn't say that, but that's what he would have to do, because he finds himself in this condition. So the invention of a God or an entirety of association that you can request beneficial results in your own relationship is a phenomenal occurrence. If you look at yourself as an animal, you would say it's an animal that invented a God. How lovely! So we don't know where we've come from, but let's agree that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Here's the fundamental necessity of you as an individual in your own mind. This then has to be a story about us. I don't care where you think the story leads you in regard to what you believe this story says. This says as a story. Obviously, this is a story. The whole Old and New Testament are nothing but stories. They're telling you stories about man's relationship with man. You then take the story and evoke from it the gratification of your own association with yourself based on terms of reference that you can use to tell your own story. If you care to look at it fundamentally, how else would man describe himself except narratively? Let me see you talk to me without being narrative. If I threw religion out of it, I could teach it this way. Obviously, everybody you meet is a narration of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Or Christ came to life, or he didn't, or my mother and dad were Adam and Eve. I don't care. Somewhere you're going to tell the story of yourself in association with yourself. I want you to say something to me that is not narrative. You can't, because we're standing in an association and we're constantly telling stories about ourselves, and we're trying to determine whether the stories are true or not. They are stories to start out with. They're attempts to symbolize relationship that we have with each other. Isn't that amazing? That's just a true thing. It's impossible to have concepts without associations of symbols. You can't do it. It's what consciousness is. Here you are trapped in a story to authenticate yourself. You have a story of reference of your own genetic makeup, your mother and your dad and your grandfather, and maybe you search back to the 15th century. You go back wherever you can in order to continue the continuity of the maintenance of yourself in a story in time. You are telling the story over and over again. What is the truth behind the story? The truth behind the story is where you utilize the story form of your own involvement in your own mind in a cognition that all man really attempts to do is define his relationship with a single universal mind. Let's do a couple of parallels. The story in Genesis says very simply that God created heaven and earth and that he had a couple called Adam and Eve. From then on, the stories are not too much concerned with Adam and Eve, but only with the offspring of Adam and Eve. Suppose I wanted to tell you the story of the Old Testament in what I will term an esoteric manner. What does that mean, esoteric? Does it mean that there are hidden meanings behind Adam and Eve and chewing on the apple and the serpent? What it means is there are hidden meanings behind everything, and that all of the meanings that you bring into the association are meanings that you want to correlate in your own mind in regard to it. If you had admitted to me that you are nothing but a story yourself. But the problem you have with that is the broader range of your association in regard to the factoring of your own mind. The less explicit you will be in the determination of the symbols. There isn't anything wrong with saying God made man and a woman, and he put them in the garden with a tree and a real serpent came down. But when you are done with it, what do you have? You have a limitation of the creation of your own mind. No one does that. They attempt to do it, but they can't do it without beginning to decide if there is another purpose. And the other purpose would have to be the totality of the image. That is, the serpent then becomes evil, and therefore all serpents are evil, or however the symbolic relationship occurs. There's no question that the historic testimony of this continuum of association, what we call our DNA, our genetic memories, as we evolve in genealogy, is adequately described in the Old Testament. Let's try it. We have Adam and Eve, and when we're dealing with Adam and Eve, we immediately are presented with two offspring. Forget us for a moment, because actually we have nothing to do with Cain and Abel. We just think we do. Cain and Abel are the first indications of the association of the totality of potential, which is Abel and Cain, which is the mind of man in association with himself. I know you're going to say, well, that's just a story. I'm going to make this as fundamental as I can. The only attempts that were ever made in the separation were the establishment of a continuity or a relationship between love, which is what God is, and intellect, or separation that pertains to man's determination to define love in his own relationship of separation. That's a description of Cain. Obviously, the consequences of Cain, which is man's intellect, would be to destroy his heart relationship with each other and dominate through the means of the progression of his own intellect to the certainty of what you would call space-time relationships, without the totality of Abel. So, what happens in the story? Obviously, Cain kills his brother. I don't know how else it could be described to you, because obviously they were both brothers of God. Cain kills Abel. When God says, Cain, where is your brother? Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? He has nothing to do at all with the totality of his association. Geographically, what you would call historically in the reference then, we have the condition called Cainism. We have a condition where man, in the capacity of symbolic relationship, is remaining in the focus, using the power of God to establish himself in the cause and effect relationships. In the references, mystically, the description of Cain is the description of Atlantis. Atlantis is the intellectual capacity of man to associate separately from the heart. Obviously, Atlantis would be destroyed by la mer, the sea, or the condition of illusion, of the necessity for the love of God. So what is God's answer to the death of Abel? He makes another heart. What is the name of the next heart? I'm doing references of man. I just did 50,000 years that didn't work genetically. We couldn't be Cains. It wouldn't work. Biologically, all we are doing is turning over for 1,000,000 years a means where we can combine the heart or love of God with our own minds. Who are we offspring of in the Bible? Who? Seth? When Cain slew Abel, the first thing God says to Cain is, you can't stay here. You have to go out east of Eden and be in the land of Nod. So Cain is asleep and lives the illusion of Atlantis contained within his own mind. Have you heard of the land of Nod? It's east of Eden, contained within the potential of the illusion. So now we have no heart. So we need a better combination of the associations of Abel and Cain. And the next line in the Bible says that God made Seth. Adam has Seth. It doesn't say God made him. Adam has Seth. So we're offspring of Seth. Homo sapiens is a Seth association. That period could be 1,000,000 years, 1,000 years, I don't care. In the meantime, we have Cain out east of Eden asleep. So how many thousands of years have passed? What difference does that make? Remember that we're talking about fundamentally here, we're attempting to describe ourselves in the relationship with the things that we are contained within our own selves. And we have to use symbols to do it. What I'm offering you is a connection between the historic references that you will read in literature and so-called mystical artifacts. The truth of them will be contained in the history of yourself as a testimony to the contents of the memory of evolving man. The Old Testament is a description of the entire condition of man, not only in relationship to himself as Seth, offspring, which would be a period of Homo sapiens, but as the failures that occurred biologically within man as he attempted it. So here now suddenly we have Seth. He's working pretty good. He works fine down on through generations all the way to where he's not going to work anymore. We get to Noah and things are not right. I'm talking now in the broadest sense. Suddenly We are faced with the totality of associations. It's all in here. It lists generation after generation of man keeping track of himself. In the meantime, Atlantis has been destroyed and we are on some sort of dry land. Pure love, obviously, could not survive on dry land and has turned to the sea, which is what the dolphin is. A dolphin is pure love without the capacity to exist in the form association. All of it does is love. If you looked at a bag of dolphins, how much they love you, they will have an historic reference. What I call the archetypal dolphins that don't participate in the play are a totality of the description of the Old Testament, including their love and return here and there, and their communication at other levels of form associations. So let's let the love be for a while, because obviously it's a form of illusion or la mer to you. Atlantis had to be destroyed simply because it had no love in it. So now we're left with a condition that was not going to gratify as rapidly as could be determined within the continuum of associations, the potential that could be realized in your return from time to eternity. What did we need? A flood. We had to be wiped out again. We had to retain the parts of it that would best benefit us, what you call historically, what you call evolutionary-wise, two of everything or combinations, so that we could literally start a new race or condition of man. And this is exactly what happened. Suddenly we have a whole story of how the ark lands, and I'm not going to do the story. But now we have a condition that we are getting pretty reasoned. We're discovering that genetically man has refined and refined and refined his associations with himself, so that when I tell you that we are all from the same genetic strain, I'm talking about very recently. The other associations, whether you call them ape man, caveman, it doesn't matter, are obviously not a part of the continuum in which we find ourselves. In that regard, we are extremely recent. An article you might want to read in the science literature yesterday in determining the DNA has absolutely made a discovery that the entire condition of man had to be reduced to less than 10,000 total inhabitants on Earth. Actually, it goes back to Lucy, the original strain. But there's a variance in the strain, and they're determined that all of us genetically come from that very small post-flood condition. It's fascinating to know that not only are we very recent, but we are a refinement of space-time. We are so close to each other that genetic DNA between so-called Europeans and a Chinaman, which is not really indistinguishable, is closer than a gorilla in one section of the jungle has with another gorilla that's 50 miles away. Their genetic strain is more separate. What we're actually saying is that what I've been telling you, we're all alike. We are so recent in the images of ourselves that we're just looking at our own genetic memories. Isn't that fascinating? So now we've got ourselves past the flood and on we go. So we have the Old Testament that's telling us a story of the totality of man in his relationship with the world. Or let me tell you another story. Why are we dealing with the Old Testament? Because the Old Testament is an example of man's condition in cause and effect relationships. Obviously, there would be a necessity found repeatedly in the Old Testament of an intercession by a conscious association who combined all of the so-called attributes of man in his relationship with God. You call that Christ. I'm not concerned about what you call it, but what purpose would you have here within space-time, having invented a God within your own mind, that you will not realize the certainty that you are that? That's what you're being offered. How good is your mind in taking analogies, like I just did with you? Now that analogy is alive to me in my mind. Here's what A Course in Miracles teaches you. It teaches you to take all of your conceptual associations within your own story and let them always mean more than they meant to you before. Do you understand what I just said? Why don't you give yourself more meaning? Why is that hard to understand if you have already determined you're going to be the meaning you are anyway? Obviously, you must be asking for a lot less than you are because you've already told me that God made you perfect. Just as obviously, you're operating within the principles of your own conceptual association. And just as obviously, you have the power which you exercise in your own mind to define yourself. All the Course really says is that if you need to define yourself, why do you define yourself as a rotting carcass sitting in a pew in Baraboo? That's the only question. It's not that you're not going to define yourself because your condition is a definition. The practice of the miracle is nothing but the momentary release of the old definition of yourself without the necessity to repeat again and again with the new genetic you, the new man. The New Testament derives with the certainty that you are whole as God created you. Where's the fear that disassociation has in regard to this? It's the admission that it is the cause of the world. That's what it's afraid of. It has no intention of being responsible for the thousands of people that are starving. It can't. It closes itself down in, lives within the very limitations of its own genetic memories. Where is its dolphin? In the sea. It couldn't stand it. If things are creations of its own mind, it would be forced to look at the fact that it is killing the things it loves. I'm doing Atlantis here. Obviously, if it truly is, as I am indicating to you, if this world is only your own mind, you obviously must be killing the things that you love because you are in a condition of killing. This is the whole teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. All it says is, give up everything and come on home and love. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye. Throw that all out and come home. Obviously, you don't do that. You sit here and get cancer and die. All we're telling you is don't do that. Somewhere, the decision has to be made by you based on the totality of you, of the offering I give you to the ultimate relationship you must have if you're in an evolutionary process. You're just going to have to emerge from the chaos of course and effect and be a whole mind as you were created by God. I went to a funeral yesterday and there was no life in it at all. Just as the funerals you go to, and that body is dead, and all the other bodies say what a wonderful thing that body was. What nonsense. Nothing dies. All of this is just only in your own mind. Nothing really leaves. What a situation to find yourself in. So we got past Seth, and the dove came and sat on Noah's head, and we've got a big rainbow that says God is not going to destroy the earth anymore. All that meant is now we've got what we need. It meant that at last we've got a species that could see a rainbow and could see a dove on the head. That's exactly what happened. That's what Jesus describes when he describes the physical awakening. He sees rainbows and the dove lands on your head. There's a lot in the Old Testament. You can get to Isaiah and you can have a lot of fun with it. Mostly it's just a description of man's condition with man. But contained within this very current reference, I'm talking about 40,000 years, are all of the possibility combinations of the perfected necessity of Homo sapiens. I don't care who he is, the genetic relationship of that body is identical to all the other bodies. This is the whole teaching. That's what constitutes you as the savior of the world. That's what makes you the Christ, Homo sapiens. That definition of yourself in the totality of your relationship through the accumulation of the forms of your DNA make you able to do that. And you're going to do it, aren't you? So somewhere you know that this is true. If it is true, if there's such a thing as a history, it would be obvious that if there is a unifying association, that all history must be contained in you. The question is not that. The question is, why would you live in your old history when you can just as well live in your future history? Do you understand the evolution? That's A Course in Miracles. It says simply, you invented time, so don't sequence it. Time is an invention of the form of the association of your mind. If you sequence it, you will be trapped in the Old Testament. You will keep telling me the same story over and over again. But if any association which is just contained within your own mind was resurrected in the certainty of truth, it would have to be you, because he is the same as you. Jesus Christ of Nazareth is you. I don't care what you call him. He can have any different memories he wants. But in the correlation of the memories, he must reach the conclusion of love. You cannot reach the conclusion of eternal love and happiness. You cannot not reach the conclusion of eternal love and happiness. That's what he wants to be. Not only is that what he is, but somewhere that's what he wants to be. So for you to suffer the conflict of the old covenant, which it was an eye for an eye covenant, makes no sense at all. Don't sequence your time. All you're telling me in this new association is that you're no longer sequencing time. I can tell you that you are living in knowledge. All you are saying is never mind that. If I'm going to remember, I might as well remember the whole thing, because I have in me that capacity. That's completely individual. Obviously, you're going to have to experience yourself within your own body. If you look at how small the earth is, it wouldn't bother you at all. Look at how small you are compared to the universe. You're contained within that little association. This genetic memory that you are experiencing is nothing but your own mind, contained within the cognition of the relationship of space-time. You have nothing to fear, because there is no such thing as fear. There cannot be such a thing as fear unless you are separated from God. Since you are the one that told me that there's a God and wholeness, it must be you that knows of the separation. If you are determined to stay fearful and allow the dolphins to stay in la mer, the sea, the illusion, I can't do anything about it, because all directions of your left brain associations will dictate terms that must be acceptable to your right, based on your determination to authenticate your relationship with the historic references of the limitations of Old Testament. Finally, I get to the point where Jesus says there's nothing else to say. The reason that it is so is because you are starting to communicate. So this is the testimony of the history of us in a genetic relationship with each other. You say, why am I in this tradition? Why do I have to be in this tradition? It makes absolutely no difference where you are. You're the one that's in there. I'm only speaking of the manner in which you apply your mind in association with the symbols, which are inventions of your mind. If you want to do an analogy with me, I will use the arc. If you want to do a perfect analogy of qubits of the arc with the human body, I'll be happy to support you and show you that's exactly true. I'd have to get you to admit that we're talking in microcosm. You are so determined to express yourself in wholeness that you have constructed a body which is the geographic entirety of the earth. Are you aware of that? Have you read the details of the human body in relationship with the cubits and how it's directly associated with? This is the Tigris and Euphrates, legs, the cradle, and civilization is what you call your first chakra. Civilization began at the source of the Tigris and the Euphrates and spread into Egypt. And there are geographic descriptions showing Egypt with the Tigris and Euphrates, which is exactly what the human body is. Where did you get your capacity to do that? Is it true that your body is that? Yes, it's true. Microcosmically, the distance between the association and Jerusalem is the totality of the relationship between Egypt and Jerusalem. There's nothing outside of you. I'm telling you that you are not a body, but you are free. But certainly, if you're going to be a body, why don't you be a total one? If you're going to be a body of association, why not be a whole body association, since the whole body is what you are? You can draw me all the stars you want, and you can do the horoscopes, and you can have each one of them represent a story in the circle of your atonement, and you can describe yourself as a Pisces or an Aquarius. You have to be a Pisces before you can be an Aquarius. How the hell do I know? You have to fish for men before you can have your own enlightenment. You like it when you do this. I'm not taking away anything from you. As you evolve your capacity of miracle-mindedness, you begin to make use of everything. You don't bind yourself into the old relationship. You walk along and say, I wonder what that is. I'll tell you what it is. It's you. You are trapped in a little place in your own mind, and you're beginning to have the experience of enlightenment. Oh, is that like the dove landing on my head? What would you like it to be? If you try to replicate it, the dove, sure than hell, will just crap on your head. What good is the symbol if I trap a dove and set it on my head? Yet this is what the human being does in an attempt to replicate the symbols rather than allow them to mean what your expanding consciousness lets them mean. Ultimately, this is the same as lesson 130. The two worlds cannot communicate. Each time you release the necessity for the symbol relationship of yourself, you become symbiotic in the totality of your own mind. All I'm offering you is your own mind. Let everything that you do be a part of your awakening process, and you couldn't possibly fail. Why? You already awoke. I love this book, the Bible. Obviously, this is a history of you up until your time of resurrection. It includes your resurrection. It's in here. Your Easter is in here. You come here and die and crucify yourself, doing the same thing over and over again, when He is risen. He is risen. We're Christians here. Happy Easter. That's the Old Testament for today. Wait until I get into Leviticus. I'll do Exodus first. Wow, they almost got back to Jerusalem. Notice I said almost. 40 years can't quite make it. He never makes it. He gets out of Egypt though. He's trapped somewhere between Egypt and Jerusalem. All of us are trapped somewhere in that 40 years. Let's call it 40 days and get it over with. Now we just call it 40 hours. How about calling it 4 minutes? Obviously, it's in any period for as long as it takes to go from Egypt to Jerusalem. How long? 40 days. But you're over the hump. Cain is sleeping over in Nod. You don't have to worry about him. The Cain in you cannot exist in this association. He's asleep. Now the love of you is in La Mer, the sea, awaiting the maturity of you and your Atlantis has been destroyed. So you have everything to look forward to because it was you all the time. The discovery you make in your own illumination is that it was always you. I've got you so squeezed in your own genetic relationship that you can see that we're all the same. It took the entire 3 billion years of Earth. You're going to read this article that says it cannot be more than 10,000 years. It's all encompassed in us, the whole world. Numbers and Deuteronomy gets a little more into mysteries. Joshua will be mystic revelation. Judges, Ruth 1 and 2, Samuel, History 1-2, Kings 1-2, Chronicles will be a little better. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastics will be vanity, always vanity. I'm doing the Old Testament. Are you up on your Old Testament? After you Ecclesiastics, which is Atlantis, you get Song of Solomon, which is the greatest love story ever told. So much that they had to expunge it from what it actually said. It was too risque. Your love of God got so passionate in the Song of Solomon that they had to ban it. Did you know that? It comes after Ecclesiastics, which is the teacher. And the teacher is just expressing that many of you course teachers have expressed your inability to teach. You say vanity, vanity, always vanity, but you don't know how to get out of it. The Song of Solomon is how you get out of it. They kicked some of it out in the 5th century. Some of the esoteric books have been taken out. You wonder how Song of Solomon could be in there. That's because of a mystical rabbi, Solomon the Leon, who went into a cave and disappeared into light incidentally. He fought the battle of leaving some of the esoteric books in here. He said, I don't know what it says, but I know it has got to be in there. Isn't that nice to know?